Harmonics. Welcome again to today's episode of The Profitable Farmer. And thank you so much for joining us. And today I'm going to start off by saying I'm kind of excited today because we got a new state on board. New Mexico is now on board with us. Our newest farmer in New Mexico is going to be using this on pecans, which is kind of interesting because New Mexico is not usually where you would consider pecans to be grown. Usually it's Texas or down south or in other areas, but this particular grower has been growing pecans for quite a while, and we know with Kyminasi Plant Booster we're going to really help him with that. He's also growing hay, which is another opportunity for us to show how much we can improve hay and that kind of stuff. But before we really get too far into it, today's episode really isn't about that specific farmer. Um, just a couple of notes. I'm going to mention him by name. I don't want to embarrass him, but he's a disabled vet, which of course excites me because one of the purposes I have with this is to help veterans. In fact, not everybody knows this, but back in 2017, 2018, when we were still wrapping up the research and development of our Kyminasi Plant Booster, we had a program to engage and enlist the veterans of the world. The idea being these veterans that would come back from their tour of duty or their service, some of them which are disabled, some of which are not. But it was our ultimate mission to help those guys get back on their feet and give them a purpose by helping their fellow farmers in their local neighborhoods improve their farming operations and farm in a healthier way, which of course, gave the veterans the opportunity to make a good money, really good living on a really good commission structure that we have, as well as helping the farmers produce better quality food. So it's their way to continue to serve their country in a way that's non-combative but still very needed, because we all need healthy quality food. So if those of you guys are veterans out there, you're interested in helping and working with us and helping us get the Kyminasi Plant Booster out to farmers around the world or your specific region, then definitely let us know. In fact, you can get a hold of me at service@harvestharmonics.com. We will forward your information to our COO, Amanda Smith, who handles all of our dealers, and she can work with you to get you on board and started. Having said all that, in the Profitable Farmer today's episode, I want to talk about that thing that's underneath our feet, the soil, the ground, right? The things of most of which farming is done, right? Because it's one thing to say, to look at your input costs, to look at your fertilization, look at your yield, look at the plant health and everything else. But sometimes, the soil is the key, the backbone of all of that. We can't grow in good soil. In fact, the farmer that we talked to today in New Mexico is joining us, has a heavy soil, heavy clay soil, which makes it very difficult. It's very difficult to grow stuff in that, especially the worse and worse it gets, the more sodium deposit gets built up in the soil. The worse that soil gets, the more difficult it is to get a crop out year over year, the less sustainable your farm can be. So in today's episode on the Profitable Farmer, I want to just give you guys a few tips on how to improve soil health, and also give you a few things to think about, because there is a lot of people going around selling microbes and some of them call the bugs in a jug or just microbial solutions, those types of things. And there's a very important thing you need to know if you're going to use those, is because microbes are critically important to healthy soils and healthy plant production. But if you continue to use chemicals and other things, it can actually can be destroying what you're trying to accomplish with them. As you could be killing the bugs, the microbes off, or reducing their activity. While you're adding to them to the soil, you're also decreasing their activity if you're continuing to use chemicals. So it's something to watch out for. And we'll get into all that here in a minute. In the first part of this, though, I wanted to share my screen with you. I want to just kind of show you guys, and guys, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the comments if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, or if you have other comments. My assistant's maybe reaching out to you, and I know we got this really interesting looking thing on my screen there. Sorry about that. I'm actually just going to share my slideshow with you. So yeah, in terms of improving soil, one of the things that our Kyminasi Plant Booster is doing is improving the soil from a number of different angles. For those of you guys who don't know what our system is, it's an irrigation system that actually uses radio wave stimulation to directly influence plant health and plant biology. But what's not always well known or well thought of is that one of the benefits of our system is that it improves microbial activity in the soil. As I just mentioned, it's important to have a healthy microbial activity in the soil, because if your soil has good microbes, The microbes in the soil, those microorganisms, the bacteria, the funguses, sometimes even the viruses, the other types of plant matter, the animals like earthworms and other things, that living ecosystem in the soil actually works together to improve and enhance soil quality. So if you want that nice, deep, rich soil, it's one thing to have those minerals that you need, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, carbon, and those types of things. It's of course needed to have all those different things in the soil. But what doesn't really get enough credit, I don't think, is microbial activity and the roles that microbes play. Microbes are responsible in nature for converting atmospheric nitrogen, which is in the molecular form of N2, meaning there's two nitrogen uh, molecule or atoms that are bonded together in a molecule called N2 or nitrogen, and that's the nitrogen we have in the air. For those of you guys who don't know, 70% of our air, or 71 or 2%, something like that, is actually nitrogen, and only about 8% of it's oxygen. So most of the air we breathe is nitrogen based. Okay, and so the question becomes, well, if the air is surrounding us and it's filled with nitrogen, why do we need to add nitrogen fertilizer to the soil? Well, the answer to that is very simple, because plants cannot absorb nitrogen in the N2 form, in that basic nitrogen molecule, right? It has to be combined with oxygen or other types of substances in order for plants to be able to utilize that. So in nature, how that process happens, and remember, this has been happening for millions of years, long before we came around. Um, those microbes in the soil, the bacteria and other microbes in the soil, are actually taking the nitrogen out of the air, that N2 molecule, and they're combining it with oxygen, and they're basically recombining it into a form of nitrate or nitrite. And that actually causes the nitrogen sequestration from the air and brings it into the soil. And from that point, you have other microorganisms like mycorrhizae, which help extend the root system in the soil so that the plants can connect to more of those nitrogen and other minerals and stuff. And so what happens is you extend the root structure through the fungal network, actually, different type of microorganism, right? So what happens if this is sort of a natural process and nature's way of enhancing and improving plant growth and plant production, then why do we need to keep adding so much fertilizer? Well, it's not just because we're using a lot more plants per square area than we normally would see. In fact, row crops and those types of things have a much reduced plant density than you'd see in nature. Obviously, if you look in a forest, there's plants everywhere, right? But in a farming operation, you just have the crop plants, and they're killing the weeds and everything else. Well, what's happening to the microbes in the soil? It's actually a cause of and the effect of fertilizer, right? In an effort to increase production, we've started adding manure and adding more chemical-based fertilizers. You know, chemical nitrogen, chemical phosphorus, chemical potash or potassium, calcium, and other things. We added it in the form of urea or DAP or other types of chemical-based fertilizers. So what they're doing is they're actually adding directly certain forms of nitrogen, like ammonium, urea, etc. And they're adding that directly to the soil. But when they're increasing the concentration of nitrogen directly through the use of chemical nitrogen, as an example, it's actually causing reduction of microbial function and reduction of microbial activity in the soil. Now, one thing that we should measure here, in fact, I'm going to actually I'm going to share a different presentation with you for this short bit here, but um, one thing that we're seeing in the soil is as we continue to add chemical nitrogen and chemical fertilizers, what happens to the microbes in the soil? Well, the microbes in the soil become dormant and they start functioning the way they should. And when that happens, you actually have a reduction of, um, oops, sorry, let me put this over here. There we go. Okay, so what happens is we actually reduce microbial activity in the soil. And I'm going to go into the biophysics of how our system works. Right now, I'll get to that in another presentation. But I want to just give you an idea here of what's happening. And to go there, I'm going to go to a website that I found a really interesting model here. It's kind of at the back of this presentation here. Now, this is kind of an interesting concept. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what EC stands for, it stands for electrical conductivity. Now, electrical conductivity is actually a measurement of the amount of sodium that's in the soil and sodium composites. Now, what does this have to do with chemical-based fertilizers? Chemical-based fertilizers actually require an EC, a higher EC, in order to function. In other words, in order for that nitrogen and other minerals and fertilizers to go into the soil, it has to have a higher EC. But when you do that, when the EC raises, the microbial function in the soil decreases. So even though you're adding more minerals, more nitrogen to the soil to increase that concentration, you're reducing the nature's aspect of it, the microbial activity, which is nature's way of creating it efficiently on its own. So as we continue to add fertilizer, you're reducing the microbial activity in the soil, and that actually reduces functionality in the soil. It creates high sodic soils over time, can actually cause residue decomposition, nitrification, denitrification, can actually reduce the soil structure and indirectly affect the amount of water uptake and water retention. So you can have a lot of negative consequences as a result of using commercial fertilizer, right? And that causes other problems such as high electrical conductivity and elsewhere. And that can actually um, reduce your function. Now, another thing that we should mention here as opposed to with soil health is nitrogen use efficiency. Now, this graph was taken in 2014, so these numbers have probably changed. In fact, I have to get this updated. But even back in 2014, we had, even in the United States, we had 60 to 80% nitrogen use efficiency. That meant between 20 and 40% of the nitrogen that was being used was actually being wasted. It was going back into the air as nitric oxide, or it was going into the waterways and creating algae blooms and various things. In other countries, as you can see here, where you have these lighter green maps here, it's actually worse. It's actually 40 to 60% use efficiency, which means that up to half or even more than half of that nitrogen being used is not being it's not being utilized by the plants. And in countries like India, Pakistan, and China, and some of these other lighter green countries in North Africa, you see a real big problem with this, where the nitrogen is not being used efficiently. And these countries are having serious problems because they're actually contributing a lot to global warming and environmental damage without actually benefiting the plants that they're trying to improve. With Kyminasi Plant Booster, one of the ways that our system combats this is by reawakening those microbes in the soil. We're getting them active again, improving their metabolism, and getting them reproducing and getting them back to doing what nature intended for them, which is basically converting these different raw materials into usable forms for plants. Now, that's going to have a multi-beneficial effect. Number one, it's going to help make the plants more efficient so that you don't need to add as much fertilizer in the first place and still get a really good crop yield. It's going to be a more sustainable solution because the microbial activity in the soil is going to continue to increase water retention and water absorption. It's going to continue to sequester carbon out of the air and sequester nitrogen out of the air, which is going to reduce global warming, which is a nice beneficial effect for the environment. And if you're in an area where you have carbon credits, this is going to be a huge benefit for you because now you can start applying for governmental assistance through carbon credits and start carbon farming in addition to your regular farming. And it's going to make your soil more sustainable over time. In other words, it's going to recondition that soil over time. So if you use our system for 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to see dramatic improvements in the quality of your soil too. Now, when you talk about efficiency and you talk about profitability, having a very well-conditioned soil and having your healthy microbial activity in the soil is going to make your soil more efficient. It's going to make your soil better equipped to continue to produce good crops year over year. And it's going to reduce your fertilizer bill, which, as you know, in 2022 has gone through the roof like everything else. And this has a tremendous number of benefits. So if you're like our farmer in New Mexico who had a lot of soil challenges and saw his yield going down, down, down year over year because of the poor quality of food and the deteriorating soil, then you need the Kyminasi Plant Booster. We specifically developed this to be a sustainable solution, to be a solution that helped you increase your yield while reducing the need for inputs and improving soil quality as well. So if you're looking for that type of solution, a natural solution that you want to be able to make it your sustainable solution, grow more organically, use cover crops, use biodynamics, and use various other forms of futuristic farming that's going to generate lots of revenue for you both now and in the future, and better quality fruits and vegetables for all of us in the future. And please give us a call, 727 324-6750. I'll have more to talk about in the next few weeks about soil health. In fact, we're going to be lining up some soil scientists, hopefully, and soil specialists who can actually walk you through how to improve the quality of your soil, both with and without Kyminasi Plant Booster. But of course, Kyminasi will just enhance all that process. And I hope to hear from you guys very soon. We want to get every farmer in the United States using this. We want to get every farmer around the world using this. We got some big deals happening this week and this next month here. And 2022 needs to be the year that we all break free from the traditional model of agriculture and the traditional model of just input, and let's start farming more intelligently. Let's start smart farming as opposed to old school farming, and let's really make your farm part of the future of farming today. Hope to work with you guys very soon, and we'll talk again